My banksters, welcome to the bank. You are here with the teller, rob the bank. Follow me as I follow the money. Let's dive deep and get rich. Let's update our software so our hardware can run efficient. So the video I'm watching, and I'm gonna be completely transparent. I am redoing it. I am redoing the video. And the reason why I'm redoing it is because I rewatched, and it's kind of funny. I usually don't rewatch my videos. I just make them, put them up, and just throw them up there and just pound out content. But I watched it, and since my channel, and this is why I really don't do many cuts, why I don't do a lot of things. It's because I'm trying to be as authentic as possible. I try to learn with you guys. I try to pick things up. I mean, obviously, I had some knowledge beforehand, but I watched this video and it made me a little uncomfortable at first because I didn't study macro or microeconomics. I'm going to school to get my MBA, but I didn't study macro or microeconomics. And I kind of shied away from that. And I feel like not only am I doing you guys a disservice, but I'm doing me a disservice because I'm not doing the information. I mean, I'm not delving, going deeper into that information and really looking into it. So I'm doing this video again. So I might be saying some things that I already said before. And I really want to touch on some of the things he's saying. So I can really take notes. I can really kind of learn what he's saying because to be honest, Jamie Dimon is the CEO of J.P. Morgan, a high level thinker, a high level guy is in a high level who understands the cogs in the machine of the United States differently than most people do. So when he says some things, I want to look into them and research them and really kind of understand them so we can get a better understanding of where he's coming from, what's to come, and so forth and so on. And you know, that's my biggest thing. I saw it and I was like, I gotta check myself because I noticed in the last one, I was like, okay, there's some things I could have dove a little bit deeper on and did more research on while on camera. So this is me doing that. So I'm just being completely honest with you guys. So, you know, but no further ado, let's go ahead and jump into Jamie Dimon.
Thank you very much for sitting down with us today. I spent a lot of time this weekend reading your letter, and my biggest takeaway from it was that you have a very clear sense of what's good for America, what's good for the economy, and what's good for JP Morgan. What is the biggest threat in your mind to that confident vision?
So every year when I write that letter, I try to think of what are the most important things. And I would add to that the free Western world, because that's what worries me the most is that the Ukraine war, the terrorist activities in Israel.
Real quick, I'm gonna touch on. I'm gonna download these letters as well, and I'm gonna add these into the notes. I'm gonna download them and kind of like read them and kind of add some stuff in the notes. So once again, you can subscribe to the free email list, and I'll be putting all this in my notes as well. So
that's what worries me the most is that the Ukraine war, the terrorist activities in Israel, the thread that's drawing between Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, the difficulties of our relationship with China, that whole thing is challenging what we would call the free democratic Western world. And that to me is the most important thing, that we get all of that right.
So real quick, this is kind of interesting because the United States is a republic. It's in the anthem. It's in the republic. And then he just said the democratic world. So this is actually kind of interesting. I want to see where he goes with this.
Well, I want to come back to the geopolitical backdrop in a minute, but right now I want to focus specifically on the economy.
Right.
As the chief exec of America's biggest bank, you have an unrivaled insight into the financial health of the US consumer. What are people doing with their money right now?
So you have to look a little bit in context. The consumer's in pretty good shape right now. Unemployment's under 4%. It's been there for 2 years. Housing prices are up. Stock prices are up. Jobs are plentiful. Wages are finally going up at the low end. The consumer's in pretty good shape. The one thing you got to be cautious about, a lot of it is driven by just fiscal spending. So even today, the deficit is 6% of GDP.
Okay, so fiscal spending, I'm not too sure of what that means. So, what is fiscal spending? Okay, all about policy, fiscal policies. Let's see. Try to get some simple. The use of government spending and tax policies to influence economic conditions, especially macroeconomic conditions. Okay, and let's go from there. What is macroeconomics? The branch of economics that studies how an overall economy behaves. It deals with the performance and structural behavior and decision making of an economy as a whole, including regional, national, and global economies. So, let's go a tad bit further. Macroeconomics examines economy-wide phenomena such as inflation, price levels, rate of economic growth, national income, gross domestic product, also known as GDP. So, okay. So, what, like, oh, God dang it. Let's see. There we go. So, this is kind of.
People who trade the markets, about 90% of them consistently lose money, and it comes down to literally one thing.
Jamie
Okay.
Dimon, thank you very much for sitting down with us today.
So now we get to kind of go over what he was just talking about. So,
I spent a lot of time this weekend reading your letter, and my biggest takeaway from it was that you have a very clear sense of what's good for America, what's good for the economy, and what's good for JP Morgan. What is the biggest threat in your mind to that confident vision?
So every year when I write that letter, I try to think of what are the most important things. I would add to that the free Western world, because that's what worries me the most is that the Ukraine war, the terrorist activities in Israel, the thread that's drawing between Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, the difficulties of our relationship with China, that whole thing is challenging what we would call the free democratic Western world. And that to me is the most important thing, that we get all of that right.
Well, I want to come back to the geopolitical backdrop in a minute, but right now I want to focus specifically on the economy.
Right.
As the chief exec of America's biggest bank, you have an unrivaled insight into the financial health of the US consumer. What are people doing with their money right now?
So you have to look at it a little bit in context. The consumer's in pretty good shape right now. Unemployment's under 4%.
So real quick, when he says the consumer, what does that mean? Because that's such a broad term, the consumer. So,
And it's been there
I don't know what he means by that, but let's wait.
for 2 years. Housing prices are up, stock prices are up, jobs are plentiful, wages are finally going up at the low end. The consumer's in pretty good shape. The one thing you got to be cautious about, a lot of it is driven by just fiscal spending. So
And then on top of that, there's a difference between consumers and producers. I would rather be on the producer side than the consumer side. Because if the consumer side and producer side are in, I don't know, please don't destroy me for saying this, but if I'm not mistaken, how I would interpret it, consumers are people who are the ones that's getting taxed, like 40-50%. Producer sides are people who have LLCs and kind of have can kind of escape tax a little bit. Producers and consumers. That's how I would interpret it, but I could be wrong. So
the one thing you got to be cautious about, a lot of it is driven by just fiscal spending. So even today, the deficit is 6% of GDP, almost $2 trillion. That's driving a lot of this growth, and that will have other consequences possibly down the road, called inflation, which may not go away like people expect. So when I look at the range of possible outcomes, you can have that soft landing. I'm a little more worried that it may not be so soft, and inflation may not quite go away people expect. I'm not talking about just this year. I'm talking about 25 and 26. The rates may have to go up a little higher. I'm talking about the 10-year rate, the 5-year rate, and that can have consequences. So we'll see.
So just from that, him saying that the inflation rates, this is what he sees. a lot of things in the longer term are going to rise. And like you said, 25, 26 in the next couple of years, inflation rates will rise. It's not going to go how most consumers are, how most people are thinking it's going to go. Everything's going to be steady and we're going to keep climbing if we're climbing. He's saying the complete opposite. He's saying that inflation is going to rise, prices, like a lot of rates are going to rise, things are going to rise. So this is like interesting to know because this is one of the guys who's sitting at the top of the mountain, pretty much saying there's going to be a spike in inflation or rates all across the board. So,
but right now you describe a pretty rosy picture, and yet we know consumers aren't feeling it. Why this disconnect?
Yeah. Well, you have to look at different consumers here. So the bottom 20% of America have not done.
And that exactly my point. You got to look at different consumers. So let's go back a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you have to look at different consumers here. So the bottom 20% of America have not done particularly well over the last 20 years. Incomes barely went up. Remember, suicide, fentanyl, crime, inflation. There are a lot of negative effects. Some people can't get mortgages, can't buy their home. So yeah, there's part of society who's kind of struggling. There's part of society who's not. And I think that's a different issue about how we deal with the policy, but you can see why that has people upset.
So just to go back.
Yeah, I agree. You got to attack those problems differently. But like you said, there's 20% at the bottom that like it's kind of hard to help that 20%. But the rest of the 80%, where does that fit in? Because if I'm not mistaken, most people who make over, let's just say, why even? Let's just do the research. How many people in America make over, let's say, 100,000? So 15%, 15.5%, and this is I don't see the dates and times. That means 85.5% of households give less than 6-figure income. That means 85.5%. Then we minus the 20. So there's 60% of people, 65% of people who are in that limbo state, also known as the middle class. So when he's saying this for the middle class. That's the middle area. 15.5% of people are in the 100,000. The 20% are obviously just, pretty bad themselves. But that 65% is in a weird gray area, or also known as the middle class, what he's saying might get hit the hardest. So I'm just go back a little bit just to kind of go back what he was saying.
So yeah, there's part of society who's kind of struggling. There's part of society who's not. And I think that's a different issue about how we deal with the policy, but you can see why that has people upset.
So just to go back.
And I definitely think it's more scary. It is really interesting because it's more scary to kind of be in the middle. Because I heard a guy say this once: the good is the enemy of great. So when you're in that kind of weird middle space, you're comfortable, and that's a scary place to be because since you're comfortable, you probably. Like, don't get me wrong, your life is okay, you living pretty decent, things are going as well as you want them to, but you are susceptible to certain harms that might come your way. And I think that's really what Jamie Dimon is kind of pointing out, is those 85% of other people. I mean, obviously the 20% is going to be the 20%, but those 65% of people really going to get hit the hardest because of where the economy's going. At least that's what I'm interpreting. But let's go deeper.
Back to the soft landing. In the letter, you concede you were on the hawkish side, but then things played out in a more benign fashion. But you're still, it's a slightly begrudging concession. You yourself sound quite glum in the letter. Can you tell us a bit more about why that is?
So I'm not looking at a year. I'm not making a forecast. I'm trying to say, what are the range of possible outcomes? And last year and this year, I would put out the same issues. Huge amount of fiscal deficit, huge amount of QE, a lot of things in the future inflationary, the green economy, the remilitarization of the world, obviously the deficits, which, basically the green fiscal deficit, huge amount of QE. I would put out the same issues. Huge amount of fiscal deficit, huge amount of QE, a lot of things in the future.
Okay, and quantitative easing. But I really want to touch on this. His mindset on attacking the problem is not forecasting what's going to happen. That's not his mindset. He's not saying, let me look down the road and see what's going to happen. What he's saying is, with all these things going on, the quantitative easing, the fiscal, depression, the future inflation and the green economy, the remilitarization, is what outcomes will happen from this. And that's really a chess player strategy. Like chess players, they memorize all the moves. But when they play in the game and they make certain moves, they can see all the moves that comes from playing. So if this guy's doing this, and this, from this possible outcome, from what he's done, there's a few possible outcomes that I could do to win the game or to lose the game, and I need to make the best decision toward that. I think that's a real interesting mindset, or different paradigm that can help attack problems better. So let me jump back a little bit. I know.
I'm trying to say, what are the range of possible outcomes? And last year and this year, I would put out the same issues. Huge amount of fiscal deficit, huge amount of QE, a lot of things in the future inflationary, the green economy, the remilitarization of the world, obviously the deficits, which,
Okay. And I know. Go away. What is quantitative easing? The introduction of new money into the supply by a central bank. Okay, so quantitative easing is pretty much them just printing bills. Them not having anything to back. Obviously, the economy or the U.S. dollar isn't backed by anything. It's backed by credit. It's not backed by anything physical like it used to be in the gold standard, but it was taken off. But they're just quantitative easing. So think about it, just easing the pressure that is happening in the United States. So they're just printing more money. So, and let's see this. How much money have they printed in the last, let's say, 5 years? Okay. Oh shit, what? They have a website for this? This is crazy. So, okay. So this is pretty much quantitative easing. So this is how the value of notes printed. So you print it, and let's just make sure it's billions. So this is how many billions of dollars they've printed. So in 2022, they've printed $2.6 billion. In 2021, they printed I'm tripping. In 2022, they printed $267 billion. In 2021, they printed $319 billion. And in 2020, they printed 216. So just in that alone, they printed over 700, let's see, if we just do that, and pretty much, let's just say in the last 4 years, this isn't 2023 nor 2024, right? They ain't even put those numbers up yet. But just in the between 2022 and 2019, they've printed close to $1 trillion, a little south of $1 trillion. That's quantitative easing. Printing more money there's no basis behind just printing money. It's just print money just to print money. is a form of monetary policy in which a central bank, like the U.S. Federal Reserve, purchases securities through open market options to increase. So economists tend to agree with QE. Does QE even work? Let's see this real quick. Uh-oh. I don't want to ask, I don't want to ask artificial intelligence. Raising asset prices. Let's see what this is, because this looks actually interesting. Can we get a bigger picture of this? Okay, or not. Okay. Occurs when the Fed buys long-term securities to boost the economy. It increases money supply and lowers long-term interest rates. It makes it easier for banks to lend and people to borrow. Okay, so quantitative easing is pretty much them buying equities and bonds. So they're purchasing notes. And for those notes, the banks don't have to, the banks are able to make a little bit of money because banks, most of the money that they make is from interest rates. That's where banks make their money, mostly from interest rates and the little fees that we get in our bank accounts. Most of the money is made from those two sources. I mean, on the consumer side, obviously they do fractional reserve banking, whole different topic, but that's pretty much how they make that. So QE is that. Okay, so this is awesome. Okay.
Basically aren't going to go away as far as the eye can see. And geopolitics. All that puts me on the side of caution that things may not go as well as people expect. With the odds of a soft landing, the market kind of prices in 70%. I think it's half of that. You know, as a business person, I try to be prepared for all of that. Just a little cautious. It looks a little bit more like the 70s to me. And I point out to a lot of people, things look pretty rosy in 1972. They were not rosy in 1973. So don't get lulled into a false sense of security because the today looks okay, that tomorrow's going to be okay. So just trying to separate the two.
And there you go. He's saying he's cautious. He's edging more towards the side of caution than he is of just being like, okay. And to me, that's kind of a admission of something's going to happen soon, especially him using the example of in 1972, things were okay. In 1973, things were not okay. So I think we're on the cusp of something happening. But just by off what he's saying, just paying attention to what he's saying, I think what he's saying is we're on the cusp of something happening. Of what? I don't know. Maybe a recession. Don't know. But from what he's saying, that's what I'm taking.
Sticking with today then, is Bidenomics working?
Partially. You know, when you spend that kind of money, you're going to have growth, and we needed some of it, like some of the industrial policy. I think the infrastructure thing is terrific. That was bipartisan. You know, other things will remain to be seen. So I think some of the American public looks at it like, what are they getting? Mm-hmm. So if you go to rural America or inner cities, I'm not sure they feel like they're being lifted up by this economy.
Do you think Jerome Powell's doing a good job as chairman of the Fed?
I have tremendous respect for Jay. I think the Fed was probably late in raising rates. They caught up. They're probably right and watching right now. We don't know what's going to happen. You might as well wait. We also don't know the full effect of QE. I'm a little more on the cautious side of that. Most people have a general feeling that you can reduce the balance sheet by several $1 trillion and its effect will not be felt. I'm not so sure. We've never had it before.
Switching tack now to
My bad.
Most people have a general feeling that you can reduce the balance sheet by several $1 trillion and its effect will not be felt. I'm not so sure. We've never had it before.
Switching tack now to
I mean, just by pumping more money, you think that the repercussions are not going to come. I think that's just like kicking the can down the road. I don't think that's really helping the situation. I mean, don't get me wrong. Yes, kicking the can down the road can kind of like help you prepare for something that's coming, but from what he said, it doesn't seem like it's going to help in the long term. Just constantly kicking that can down the road doesn't seem like it's going to help. In trading, the volatility of a stock, the higher it rises, the more likely it's going to just plummet. So I think that's kind of also what he's saying too, is that since we've been kicking the can down the road and kind of easing things and we're on an upward trajectory and possibly depending on how steep the trajectory is going up, there possibly, I mean, there has to be. It's just the way law is set up. Is that once you spike so much, you're going to fall. So we may be on the cusp of that just by what he's saying. So
Politics. We've got wars going on in the Middle East and in Europe that create an enormous amount of economic uncertainty. If we focus first on the Middle East, do you think that the US position towards the Israel-Hamas war is the right one?
I think Israel has the right to defend itself. I think war is a terrible thing. I think people have to be honest about what war is, and when they look at the civilian deaths and all the things like that. So I don't know the specifics of the military. I think the notion that they aren't going to defend themselves is wrong. So I'll leave the military experts decide, what's the right way to go do that. Every general I see on TV, and I've spoken to several, city conflict is really bad. And it's door by door, higher amount of civilian casualties. Hamas must have known there was going to be quite a reaction to what they did. By the way, it's unjustifiable for any reason ever. So I want to be clear about that.
And then we've got war in Ukraine as well, where Ukraine clearly struggling against Russia. What would it mean for the global economy if Russia was to win?
Could be a potential disaster, because this is the first war in Europe, free democratic nation invaded by 200,000 or 300,000 Russian soldiers under the threat of nuclear blackmail. So we've never had nuclear blackmail before, which is also teaching the whole world, maybe having nuclear weapons pretty good thing, because people will be afraid of you. You can abuse a neighbor if you feel like it. But the other thing is affecting all alliances.
So I'm guessing nuclear blackmail is pretty much saying, like, if you don't give up your land, you're going to get it. I'm guessing that's what that is.
Russia wins, I personally think you might see a lot of people deciding that, will America stand up for Europe? Can you rely on them? And if you can't rely on them, what are you going to do? And that includes economically. So that's why I kind of talk about the economic battlefield and the battlefield. So economically, every nation can say, what makes me secure?
That's an interesting term he just used, the economic battlefield. And it's kind of interesting because Steve Jobs said this in his book, but he said business is war. And I mean, one of the top guys is saying it, but being in business, you also know that your job is to deliver the best way you can on the products you can and beat everybody else out. I mean, you want to be usually in the top three. You want to be number one or two. Typically, you want to be number two because number one is it's kind of harder to stay number one. I mean, there's a lot more things you have to do to stay number one. You really want to be number two. But yeah, so you make sure that this is war. So you got an economic battlefield. I like that. I might steal that.
It makes me secure in energy, food, all the things I need. So I'm a little worried that if Russia wins that war, you're going to see kind of the world kind of enter a little bit of chaos as people realign alliances and economic relationships, et cetera.
So China's complicated, obviously, because on the one hand, we have so much trade with China, the supply chains are integrated, but at the same time, we reported recently that China is aiding the Russian war effort, and there's now a proposal by the US to sanction Chinese banks. How should the US approach China?
So, and just before he touches on this, so China and Russia have been working together, are allies because of the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, China, and Saudi Arabia. So the BRICS nations, they came together and wanted to pretty much build their own economy, which other nations have gone into. But that is the geopolitical agenda that Jamie Dimon is saying that we have to this is the economical battlefield that we have to fight on, because we have people coming against us or working against us or allying with each other to come against us. So this is actually, man, this is like soap operas, like real life soap operas.
I always tell America, take a deep breath. We have all the foodborne energy we need, the Atlantic and the Pacific, no wars in North America, South America. China imports 11 million barrels of oil a day. They're a very complicated neighbor. Their own actions are causing all their neighbors to rearm. Their GDP per person is $15,000 versus our 80. So, we're in a very good position. We have to restructure trade around national security. They need oil and gas, so the LNG, I think, is very important strategically. So
What is the LNG? Liquid natural gas. Liquefied natural gas. Okay. Okay.
Would 80. So, we're in a very good position. We have to restructure trade around national security. They need oil and gas, so the LNG, I think, is very important
Liquefied natural
strategically.
gas. Okay.
So I would negotiate them around all of that. I'm glad they're doing it. As long as Ukraine is there and they're doing anything to aid and abet, I think it makes it very hard to have a great relationship with them. I'm glad the government has the authority to do certain things. If, in fact, some of these things are true, yeah, they should do some sanctions.
Right.
But they should expect some back, by the way.
I want to turn now.
Real quick, I know I keep stopping this, but what is sanctions? Sanctions. I know I have a decent definition of what sanctions are, but I don't know. Okay, had come to existence. Awesome. Sanctions violation. Sanctions are federal government actions restricting economic activity between U.S. and foreign entities. Okay, so they're restricting economic activities. So they're pretty much saying, nah, we ain't doing business. We ain't doing business together. Screw that. Fuck all that. We're not doing business. Okay.
Domestic matters and the forthcoming election. We're in the very unusual position of knowing what a Trump presidency looks like. We know what a Biden presidency looks like. Who's the best candidate for the economy for
This is
2020?
interesting.
I'm not going to go into that kind of thing right now. And whoever is president, we will try to help. I would like them to put a lot of experts around them, not just academic, but practitioners in the real world, because I think it matters.
How about you as one of the experts? I know you were your name has come up in the context of a new Fed chairman.
I would not do Fed chairman, Treasury secretary. I don't think I'd ever be picked for that. So.
Okay, you're not.
And I think what he just said was really interesting because he said that he wants a president that doesn't have a bunch of academic people around him, but actual practitioners. Just kind of about what he's saying, I think he's leaning more towards Trump, which is not a negative thing. I mean, who's ever best fit to run the country, because it is a company, should be somebody who's been in business and is a practitioner of business. I think that's why he leans more that way, because the U.S. is a company first. I mean, in all of its, vernacular and wording, when it comes down to it, it is a company. So I think he's leaning more towards somebody, like he just said, is a practitioner, somebody who practices business. I would say Trump, just off business standards, I would say Trump is a better businessman than Biden. Not saying that he's a better person, not saying that I'm not saying any of those things. What I'm saying is, in business sense, I think he's better. So yeah, that's a tough. That's a great question. It's a tough question to answer, especially
Not a politician, but you are
especially in his position. That's a tough question to answer.
a chief executive, and
Especially, it's a tough decision for him to answer because his job isn't to pick a side. His job is to make sure that he works with either side. His job is to try to figure out whomever is in office is to try to help them as best as possible, because it's in his best benefit as the CEO of JP Morgan. It's in his benefit not to pick sides. Look, I don't want to pick sides. I might like a guy better, but that's not in my best benefit. It's not in my benefit to pick and choose. My benefit is to help the economy. It's to help the country to grow and move forward. So I can see why he wouldn't want to answer that, which is, I think, is smart. I mean, it bears no weight to whom I pick. My job is to help the country and my company grow. So
I'd never be picked for that. So.
okay, you're not a politician, but you are a chief executive, and obviously there are a lot of pressures with the job. You had a near-death experience about 4 years ago with your aortic tear, and before that you'd had a big cancer scare. How did those experiences change you?
A cancer scare. It was cancer.
Yeah.
I don't know. I probably have a little PTSD from all of them, and I think you try to live life a little more deliberately. So I love what I do. I love my job. I love my family. I love all those things. So nothing really changed that way, but it is a little more deliberate. When I was being wheeled in the operating room for the dissection, I knew it was like 50-50. And I didn't have any regrets. So because people always said, do you have regrets? I said, no. And the only thing I would say, I do want to help this country and the world and the free Western world. That is on my mind. Maybe that changed a little bit.
Yeah. Now, you've been chief exec for 18 years.
Wow.
You're obviously in a very powerful position. But even the most powerful people, powerful leaders need checks and balances. Who keeps you in check?
Well, my wife would probably say, I do, and she does. But I think my management team, we're all very open. Everyone, we share everything. I emote to them, ways that you wouldn't hear me do it elsewhere. They emote back. You're wrong. You didn't read it properly, or you missed this major point. So it's a very open conversation. I don't think any of those folks are intimidated by me, And there's very little after the fact conversation like, okay, I didn't want to mention this in front of everybody. They're brave enough to mention in front of anybody. And I've had people, 3 of them come in and say, Jamie, you're making a mistake. Sit down. We want to explain it to you. Don't say anything. I say, okay, lay it on me. So you try to create a very open environment. And then also, we have regulators, auditors, press. So believe me, we get a lot of feedback from a lot of people.
Just to bring it back to...
So it's a lot of things to touch on. And first, I keep dropping my damn Apple Pen. Let me pick this up. So the biggest things that I heard when he was speaking was, first off, he has an 18-year tenure, or 18-year run at being a CEO of a very cornerstone business in the United States. It's a bank. Which means he's been on top of the game for a very long time. And if I'm not mistaken, that's actually the biggest bank besides the central bank in the world. And I see this theme throughout all high-level people, especially people in finance, but I'm pretty sure it will reverb to other companies, is like Ray Dalio's principles is extreme honesty and extreme openness. And that's pretty much what he said. Now, like he said, he's probably not as he's probably a little bit more candid when he's not on camera, and when he's talking to his team, he's probably not as, clean with his words. But him and his team, they have a floor to where they can speak openly and honest, telling him if he's wrong, saying things and working as a team where, yes, he's the leader, but he also knows his limits. I'm pretty sure if you were to ask Jamie Dimon if he has limits, he would know his limits. And he surrounds himself with some of the smartest people and gathers the intel from the smartest people. The book, The Effective Executive, talks about the jobs of the executive. And the job of the executive is to think longer term to the overall goal for the company and to make decisions, make a few decisions, not a lot of decisions, a few decisions based on to move the company. And to do that, you have to be able to be open to hear the other chief officers, like the CTO, CFO, CNO, so forth and so on, to hear these opinions. You quantify and correlate all of this information, and then be able to make a good decision based on that. That is the essential job of the CEO, is to make effective decisions based on the information that he's given. And I take that as not even having to be a CEO of such a large company. You can do that with just everyday life. Is that you have to be open to hear. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a degree of ignorance that you must have, or deafness, for lack of a better term, to have when you are building a company and when you have that. So you have to be kind of just like, I don't want to hear what you got to say. But that's only to people who are not the best people for these positions. I believe that you want to hear the best people in these positions that have a track record of showing that they're the best people in these fields. And you can give an ear to these people and listen to these people because they are the best people in these fields. They're the most knowledgeable and probably the most effective people in these fields. So to be an effective leader or effective executive, you have to do these type of things. And I think this is one of the, obviously, it's not even uncorrelated. It clearly shows that to a large degree, to last such a long time, and 18 years is, I mean, it's a pretty decent time, almost 2 decades, pretty long time, is that you must be able to be open and honest, extraordinary honesty and openness to and gather so much data from the best people around you, and then make the best decision. And I think you can make better decisions that way. So,
the current news cycle with these very polarizing issues in America, do you think that's the sort of thing that chief execs like you should comment on publicly or make statements as a company on?
The answer is yes, if it's appropriate and you know how to do it. So, in my letter, it's quite clear. I'm a full-throated, red-blooded, patriotic, free enterprise capitalist. And I'm unabashed and unashamed. I also acknowledge that we've left part of society behind. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging it and trying to do something about it. So, we do a little bit of both. So we'll support the LGBT community. We'll support free, fair, safe voting. When it comes to lifting up other parts of society, absolutely.
So I've got some final questions here. They're short questions that require short answers.
Okay.
How many days should people be in the office?
5 is ideal.
Are America's downtowns dead?
No. I think some are going to have difficulty because of their own policies, but no.
If you're a young person and you want to work at JP Morgan, what should you study at college?
It almost doesn't matter, to tell you the truth, because you're looking for smart, ethical, decent people. I do think in business, you should learn the language of business, which is accounting, and learn a little bit basic business. So I think it would help to do accounting, finance, markets, something like that.
On the rare.
I mean, you heard it here from one of the top CEOs of the country. Jamie Dimon said, it really doesn't matter what you study in college. We are looking for the brightest people. We don't care that you go to college. That's what he just said. You ain't hear it from my mouth. You heard it from Jamie Dimon's mouth. Study accounting? You should study. By the way, that's what I'm studying in my MBA is accounting. Because I heard, God, what this guy? He wrote The Road Less Stupid. He has another book, and he said the same thing. I can't think of his name right now. Now it's going Cunningham. It's gonna hurt me now. Cunningham. Don't worry, I'll put that in the notes. Study accounting, basic business. And I would go further and say micro/macro economics. No need for college. Heard it from Jamie Dimon.
Rare occasion that you take a day off, what do you do?
But I'm pretty sure he went to college. I don't know. I want to look up more on Jamie Dimon.
So my daughters have said to me, Dad, you need some more hobbies. I love my family, so we have a lot of family dinners when I'm around. We hike together. We take vacations together. I love wine. I love music. I just started playing squash again, which I'm still worried about, but I'm going to do it.
What's your morning routine?
Okay, I wake up usually at 4:30 or 5. I read 5 papers you'll be happy to hear in a very specific form. So I flick through the Post. I read the front page of the Washington Post. Then I read the New York Times front section beginning to end, all of it. I read their business section, which isn't so great. Then I read the Wall Street Journal front section, Exchange next, and then the FT. And the reason I do FT last is because all the other ones are very much skewed to the U.S. So I like reading. I'll do it for hours in the morning. But then I like to get a little exercise and go into the office. So.
And do you ever switch off your phone?
I am not a fanatic on the phone. I don't even have it here. I have it outside, but I think people should spend a little bit less time on that, a little more time thinking. But I'm not on any social media. Every year I test it. I go on for literally just a week to see everyone else is doing. You know, Reels and Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, and then I click out of it.
Never
So,
tempted.
No.
Good. Well, Jamie Dimon, thank you very much indeed.
Emma, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
So real touch real quick. So I see this kind of thing a lot with these guys in the higher up, like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, a lot of these guys, and their morning routine is he's waking up 4:30, and the first thing he's doing is reading. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, if I'm not mistaken, they read for like 6 hours a day, like that. Now, what they're reading, the content that they're reading is probably different because obviously Warren Buffett's probably reading 4Ks. Not 4Ks. The shareholder 10Ks. You're reading 10Ks or financial reports. And probably global financial reports. You know, he probably has his own thing that he has a bunch of people going out to get. Nonetheless, what he's doing is reading. He's reading a lot. I'm pretty sure, like with lawyers, a lot of what they're doing is probably reading cases and stuff like that too. So I see that the first thing he's attacking is his mind. He's waking up early, and the first thing he's going after is his mind. And then he's working out, and then he's working out his body. So that's kind of an interesting thing that I'm seeing a lot with a lot of high executives is that they're reading first. They're going after and obviously working from the top down. So that's real interesting. Let me see. Oh, and he's saying he touched on another point with his lack of Instagram use or social media use is that he likes to think. He gives his mind time to think, and I think that is a necessary thing. Obviously, I mean, you have to think. You know, you better do it until they got to tax you to do it. So, I think this is a really good video. I've learned a lot. I got a ton of notes. I got to pull together a lot more notes as well, like pictures and stuff from what we researched. But I mean, all of this is like a really great video. So. I like Jamie Dimon. He seems like a pretty cool dude. He seems like he's, I mean, obviously he's knowledgeable. He's, you know, made it this far in the business that he's in. So, yeah, man. So let's dive even deeper. Let's get even richer. And let's update our software. And so our hardware can run more efficiently. Catch me on the next one. Peace.
Thank you.
Oh, shoot.